Let's talk about instant e-waste for a second. Instant e-waste is an electronic device or gadget that is either so low quality or so out of date when it's made that the moment it rolls off the production line, it is essentially useless. It's garbage in every meaningful way already. It just needs to make a couple of pit stops on a store shelf in some poor sap's house before it winds up in, best case scenario, a recycling center. It represents a waste of material, a waste of energy, and a waste of money for the manufacturer, shipper, retailers, and consumers who touch it along the way. Of all the issues that exist in the tech world today, instant e-waste may be among the most idiotic. This Polaroid branded Bluetooth speaker is not, technically, instant e-waste. It does in fact just manage to squeak by that dubious honor. That doesn't mean it's good, not by any stretch of the imagination. Listen, it's no secret that Polaroid missed the opportunity to turn their brand into something meaningful in the digital age, and when they finally made the effort, they pivoted in exactly the wrong direction and started making lousy digital cameras that docked into portable photo printers. They've managed to stabilize their plummet somewhat by just leaning into what they were always good at: niche camera designs and instant developing film. These days, they're marketing basically the exact same cameras and film they've always made to hipsters nostalgic for another time, and the aesthetic of their bizarrely shaped cameras and white-framed square images with a charming grain probably isn't going out of style anytime soon. It's not a huge customer base, but it's a loyal one, and they should be able to survive for the foreseeable future just on sales of their exclusive and therefore expensive film. So whatever moron at Polaroid decided that they needed to add another revenue stream by licensing their brand out to whoever it is that's producing these trash audio products in China really needs to be ousted from the company. This is called brand dilution, and if you want a solid example of just how terrible an idea this really is, go check out the Wikipedia page on formerly respected Japanese audio firm Nakamichi. Alright, that's enough about the slow, agonizing death of Polaroid's brand. How about their speaker? This little geometric ball with a built-in battery charged via micro USB and connected via Bluetooth 3? How good of a product is this thing really, along with its bevy of non-branded lookalikes on value store shelves? I'll be honest, it's better than the built-in speaker on your phone, and at $8, that's probably as good as it needed to be for some people. But that doesn't mean you should buy one. Now, how we experience sound is largely subjective, and accurately cataloging the few objective elements of speaker output requires extremely expensive facilities and equipment that I don't have and frankly don't want. Like, if I had $1 million to build an acoustic testing lab onto the back of my house, I can guarantee the addition to the back of my house would look an awful lot more like a dope kitchen with a full master suite and a theater room in the basement. I might consider doing a mild acoustic treatment to the theater. All that is to say that my testing was subjective, and my conclusions likewise, but just so you know where my subjective baseline comes from, I compared this little speaker to two other speakers in order to form my opinions. The first is this pair of Boston Acoustic CR6 bookshelf speakers driven by an old Yamaha amp playing lossless files in Apple Music over a wired connection to my phone. This isn't exactly super high-end, and the fact that I've shoved them into this old radio cabinet should make it pretty clear that this is more about the aesthetics than anything else. But the speakers are better than mid-range, the amp's power is clean, and this is as close to audiophile hi-fi listening as the average consumer is going to care to get. The second thing I used as a point of comparison is going to look familiar to subscribers. See, I figured that it would be unfair to only compare a Bluetooth speaker to a wired connection. What if a significant decrease in quality came down to wireless signal? So I pulled out this tiny amp I use for testing speakers, which does in fact also have a Bluetooth chip on board, and hooked it up to this driver I harvested from an old home theater satellite. If you were to take all of this and whack it together into an enclosure, it would wind up being larger and more expensive than the Polaroid, yes. But if Bluetooth is the real culprit behind any lackluster performance on the part of this little guy, we should be able to suss that out here. Let me start by describing the sound of the CR6s, beyond just saying that it's good. These aren't reference monitors like you might use for mastering audio tracks, they're entertainment boxes intended to play smooth jazz in your living room. So the frequency response curve, basically just a way of graphically depicting how good a speaker is at representing specific types of sound, is shaped a little something like this. It's a wide U, with slightly heightened bass and a little bit of overly sparkly high stuff. It's nothing extreme, and I could easily EQ this closer to a flat line using controls on the amp, but this sort of response curve is actually rather pleasant for most genres of music. The CR6s represent the full width of any track I throw at them quite well, with clarity that really lets you focus on whatever part of the track you want. They instill a lot of confidence that what you're getting out of them is pretty close to what the artist wanted you to hear. The sound of my homemade Bluetooth speaker is starkly different. It suffers from something you car folks out there would recognize as a lack of displacement, and as such, the bass is lacking. There is still plenty of clarity to the high end, but even then, there is some detail lost by shoving all the sound out through a single diaphragm rather than the 4 used in the CR6s, If you like highs and bass offends you, particularly on heavily vocal tracks, this isn't terrible to listen to, but otherwise you will definitely notice the low end missing. And then there's the Polaroid. I was expecting something similar to my homemade speaker from this thing if I'm being honest. At the very least, I expected highs to be hilariously overrepresented, due simply to the tiny diameter of this driver. But no, this is somehow even worse. I would describe the response curve of this thing as more of a bell, or heck, even a spike, upon which it impales itself. There is no bass, there are no highs, it's all mids, and they're made entirely out of mud. There was one track that I used in my comparison testing that illustrates the differences between these speakers quite well. The Allegro non troppo from Dmitri Shostakovich's Symphony No. 5 has several moments toward the end that build down, starting with the violins and resolving with the basses. My homemade speaker did a good job representing everything the violins were doing, but it felt very empty when the basses were supposed to land. In contrast, the CR6s let me enjoy the nuances of the entire orchestra, and when the basses come in, it resonates sublimely. Then there's the Polaroid, which in one section manages to lose both the violins and the basses, thrusting the realization on me that the violas were actually playing a note there. That's right, the Polaroid emphasizes the violas. I don't care what your musical tastes are, that just ain't right. The sound isn't good. If you listen to music on your phone speaker, you have an idea of how this thing lands. The only difference is that it does present slightly more bass than your average phone, and it does get quite a bit louder, but it is still a pretty lousy way to consume your music. So no, I wouldn't recommend you buy one. Save up a bit more money and buy a better speaker. But I started this out by saying that the Polaroid speaker wasn't instant e-waste, and that's because there is one use case where I can see this being valuable. If you've got a phone or a tablet that is used to consume content like TV shows and movies regularly and the speakers are flaky or outright broken, this is a cheap way to bring back sound to that device. If it's you doing the consuming, I'd still recommend saving up for something better. But say you just aren't willing to spend any real money on it, maybe because it's a secondary device for a child or grandchild. This Polaroid will fit that bill nicely. It lets you hear what they're watching too, and therefore may be preferable to headphones. And heck, it will still probably sound better than the original speakers did anyways. So there are reasons to buy something like this, but listening to music isn't one of them. You buy this because you're looking for something cheap, and honestly couldn't care how it sounds, so long as it works. Well, this speaker does technically work. Go ahead and slap that on the box, Polaroid.